in New York City, I'm going to tell you two things that happen. Same idea. You don't have Uber here, but you know how Uber works, right? When it's raining, what happens to the price of an Uber? It goes up. Why? Raise your hand. Why? More demand, meaning people can't find a car. So what does the increase in price do? What's the idea of it? I don't know what it actually does, but what's the idea?
Gives incentive to the driver.
What?
Gives incentive to the driver.
Give the incentive to the driver to do what?
To drive more.
To drive. Someone who was going to take a break and maybe take a short day now has an incentive to stay longer. That's the idea, right?
And lowers demand.
And it lowers demand, right? And it allocates, fancy word, what does allocate mean? Kind of decides who gets it. Not literally, but it makes it's a way for to deal with the reality that in general, with every single thing in the world, more people want it than it is available, right? What economics is about is studying, and to some extent, economics is about studying that phenomenon, that problem. There's not enough to go around, right? Everybody would like more. We'd like there to be, if the price were lower, people would use it more. If the price were higher, people would use it less. So one time in New York, one night, there was a bomb. There was an explosion. Everybody knows what an explosion is? Big loud noise. Nobody knew whether it was a bomb or could have been a natural event like something about the in English, say a gas line, something under the ground that exploded. It can happen. It has nothing to do with terrorism. But this was actually a bomb. And a bunch of people in this area who'd heard it decided, I don't want to be here anymore. They wanted to get out. Okay? Same thing happened in Australia. I think it was in, I can't remember whether it was Melbourne or Sydney. There was a terrorist attack in an area of the city. And of course, people don't know whether this is a one-time event, whether there's going to be more. So in that case, people wanted to get to the airport. They were so afraid of what had happened. They wanted to, I don't know what they were thinking, but they wanted to get to the airport. So in those situations, it's not like a rainy night. The price of an Uber goes extremely high. The name for it is surge pricing. The surge means a big increase, like the tide in the ocean. A surge is a big increase. There's a surge of demand, not just like an increase. You also might say in English a spike, a sudden increase. And there's not enough Ubers to go around or taxis, so the price goes up a lot. Now, a lot of people don't like this. They complain about it. Uber takes a lot of criticism, and they say it's wrong. Now, I want you to put yourself in the position of someone who thinks this is wrong. What would be an argument? There's more than one. Give me an argument for why this is wrong that Uber raises the prices. Raise your hand.
It's unequal.
It's unequal. Why?
Because people with lower income couldn't afford it.
The people with lower incomes can't afford it. Now, is that literally true?
No.
Not exactly. Why is it? That's the argument. That's the language we say in English. They can't afford it. They can't afford it, literally. It's not literally true. Why is it not true?
Because they probably have money.
They probably have enough for that night. So normally the ride might be $20. Tonight it might be $100, might be $200. But most people have $200. Not the poorest people, not a homeless person, right? A person who's homeless probably doesn't have $200. But many poor people have $200, and if their life was at stake, they might be willing to spend it. What would be the argument for why it is moral to let the price be high? What's your name?
Tom.
Tom?
That only the people that really needs this ride will pay.
The people who really need it, that way will get it. That's a bad argument. Why? I've said it many times, but it's wrong. Why? Raise your hand. What's your name? Sorry.
Because there's no actual correlation between how high it is and how it is.
There might be a correlation, but it's not perfect. And certainly the people who are willing to pay the most might not be the people who need it the way we would use the word need. Maybe they have other options. Maybe the money's not so important to them, right? Okay. What is the effect? Let's not talk about the morality. What is the effect of letting the price go up? A lot. So raise your hand, yes?
By allowing the price go up at some places, we also can have lower prices at other areas.
It could be cheaper elsewhere, but the other argument, which we did not mention, very important, is that the people who, not everybody knows that there's been an explosion. So the people who don't know, who are thinking of taking an Uber to go to get some coffee or to go to a movie or to meet a friend, when they see that it's $200, what are they going to do? They're not going to go. Either going to walk, or they're just going to call their friend and say, I don't know what's going on, but it's $200 to come see you, and even though I like you a lot, I think I'm going to wait till tomorrow, right? And by doing that, what happens? The people who are afraid have more of a chance to get the car. Now, that's nice, but it doesn't answer the question about the poorest people. It does give the richer people an advantage because generally they have more money to spend. Now, you do have to remember that under capitalism, the rich don't get everything. In America, it's not quite true here in Israel, but in America, almost everyone has a car, rich and poor. The only difference is the rich get a fancier car. But the poor person's car in America actually works very well, right? It takes you to the same place. It has a rear view camera. It has anti-lock brakes. It has cups to put your soft drink. It's really a lovely thing. Even if you're driving a very inexpensive car, you don't get leather. But, you know, that's not really a big disadvantage in life, right? So it's not like the rich will get all the Ubers and the poor will get nothing on a night like we're talking about. But it is true that the rich will have a little easier time affording it to get out of town. So if you're me, and you really like markets, and you really like the idea that prices should be free to move around, what would you say is the best argument I can make? Now, I can make a lot of arguments. We could spend another 20 minutes. We're not going to do that. We could make a list. What would I say? But I'm going to tell you what I think is the most important argument. The most important argument is not easily seen. What do we see? We see the price of Uber is $200. Oh my gosh. You didn't mention the worst thing about that Uber and the drivers are profiting from the fear of people. They're under tremendous stress. They're afraid of what's happening on the street, and you're going to make money off of them. Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Doesn't sound good, right? Sounds like a bad thing. Of course, a doctor who takes out a cancer, a tumor that you have, is also making money when you're sick, so when you're desperate. So we have funny cultural tarbut. We have attitudes toward money that complicate thinking about them clearly. Question?
No, I just want to say that maybe the drivers also fear from the event.
They might be afraid too, and excellent point. And I hope what you're going to say. I'm sorry for not letting you fully talk, everybody, because what?
Continue.
I have way too much material today, but I'm excited to talk to you about so many things, so it's hard for me. You have to remember, I was a professor for 30 years, okay? Then when I wasn't a professor, I had my podcast, and my wife said I gave you the wrong email. I didn't tell you I just said Russ Roberts. It's russroberts@gmail. I don't know if I mentioned that. russroberts@gmail. You can find everything I do at russroberts.info, I-N-F-O. I put all my videos, interviews, podcasts, articles, books, they're all there. I was a teacher for 30 years. Then when I wasn't a teacher, I could come lecture and do things like this. For 2 years, I haven't lectured. I've done nothing. I'm so excited. Forget that Mary O'Grady. She's not talking at 3 o'clock. No way. No, I will try to keep to my time. But I am kind of excited. Sorry. So, what's your name? Veer? Ophir. Ophir makes an excellent point. There's a side thing, which we didn't talk about, which is that these poor drivers who often don't have a lot of money, you're bribing them to go take on a risk, right? Is that what you meant? Excellent point, right? What?
Like the higher the price is, it's a compensation for the risk.
It's compensation for the risk, but it's kind of unattractive because they're kind of poor often, And the money is very valuable to them, and you're paying them to put themselves in danger, you could argue. Okay, but here's the part that's hard to see. What's hard to see, I think you all know the real answer, is you get more drivers, okay? For better, we could talk about all the pluses and minuses. You get more drivers, which means that more people, in theory, will get away from the danger, which is a good thing if you don't like it. If you don't like the idea of poor people sometimes not choosing to afford it because they're poor, or drivers choosing to go because they're poor, or the idea that people are making money under conditions of stress and fear, then you have to tell me your way to get more people to head toward danger rather than away from danger. What Uber surge pricing does is it encourages people to head toward danger, sakana. That is an amazing thing because there's not an obvious way to solve that problem. Now, I want to suggest a way, and that's my lead-in for my talk today. You could make an announcement. You could say, and it's hard to know where you would put this announcement, right? It could be an alert on your phone. It could be you could sign up. Technology today allows this to be imaginable. You could sign up for an alert that if there's a crisis, you could go drive your own car into that neighborhood and pick up someone. Why? To help them out of generosity. Give me some more words. Love. Compassion, kindness, chesed, rachamim, Ken? You could. We do that in many places in our economy. Can you think of an example where instead of paying people to do the nice thing, the right thing, the thing we want, what's an example? Blood donation. When there's a shortage of blood, right? When there's extra, for whatever reasons, not enough blood, what do? We don't, some places pay people, by the way. And some people pay people, but not with money. They pay with other ways of rewarding them. But in many places, I don't know, maybe most, you don't get money for giving blood. You don't get an advantage. You just get what? Raise your hand. What do you get? What? Grape juice. No, what do you get? That's not the main reason people give blood. What? Good feeling, right? A good feeling. Feeling of satisfaction of you helped another human being. So there is another way to solve this problem, which is, you could call it preaching, you could call it musar, I don't know what else you would want to call it, but you could just encourage people to do the right thing. So, my joke to start the talk is that all of us grew up under socialism. It's called the family. The family is a socialist institution, very egalitarian. Everything is shared. When there's a problem, give my favorite example. My oldest son collected, he doesn't anymore, but he collected baseball cards. This is probably the only Friedberg Economic Institute where baseball cards are mentioned twice. Michael Eisenberg mentioned it. That was the first company he invested in was Topps, which makes baseball cards. So my oldest son collected baseball cards. Do you know what they are? Everybody know? Yeah. Okay. So his younger brothers also collected baseball cards. And what I discovered is that my oldest son, who's a very smart person, would make trades with his younger brothers that were not exactly fair. Right? He took advantage of them. They did not understand who the players were, what they were worth, who was more valuable, and he would make a trade. And then the younger brother would come to me and say, Dad, I made this great trade. I said, what did you get? He'd show me. I said, what did you give up? He'd show me. I'd say, call them all together. I said, this trade has been canceled. The commissioner of baseball cards, that's me, has decided this is unfair, right? So in the home, in the family, that happens all the time. We don't have, let's say it's dinner time. Everybody wants the pulky, the chicken leg, and the chicken only has 2 legs. Just for the record, my wife and daughter are both vegetarian now, so we don't eat much chicken anymore. But in the old days, imagine there were 2 chicken legs, and there are 3 boys. My daughter, let's say, is a vegetarian at this point. There's 3 boys who want a chicken leg. What do? I don't have an auction. You know what an auction is? What is it, Bivrit? What is it?
מכירה פומבית.
Mechira pumbit? Pumbit. Okay, so I don't say, okay, who wants the chicken leg? Going once, going twice, $7, $88, $58, right? I don't charge them rent. My daughter got the nicest bedroom. Not fair. I didn't sell it to the highest bidder. I did not allocate things in our family. My wife and I did not allocate things in our family using prices. It's a dictatorship, but it's a socialist dictatorship. It's driven by love, right? So I want them to turn out a certain way. Not every economist does that, by the way. There are economists who brag, who boast about how they use prices and they gave out allowances. And I did do an experiment for a while with one of my kids where I played bank. I was the Bank Mishpacha Roberts, and I would tell them that if they kept their money in the bank with me, let's say I gave them some money, I'd say, I can give you the money, but if you wait 6 months, I'll give you this much more. Because in the real world, they can't get much interest on their money, but with me, I could give them a very attractive rate of interest to try to teach them the idea of not spending all their money and to save. I did that a little bit, I admit it. Not so much, but I did do it. But in general, prices were not used in our family. My wife and I allocated goods based on love. We looked and saw if somebody had a bad day, they got the chicken leg, right? That's what we do. We also redistribute income all the time in families. If there's one of the kids is having trouble in school, I might hire a tutor for that child, and the other kids might say, well, where's my tutor? Or if he got a tutor, then I get a bike. No, it doesn't work that way, right? I'm doing what's best for you, and you have to trust me. I'm your father, she's your mom. So that works. Institution, you can decide how old the institution of the family is, but the family has been a socialist institution for a long, long time, okay? Long, long time. It's really appealing. It's very attractive. The idea that people should get what they need and not what they earn, not what they are stuck with. So we have a natural impulse, says the economist F.A. Hayek. We have a natural impulse to take that model and extend it. What would be an example of that model extended? Be'eretz Yisrael. The kibbutz, right? In the original kibbutzim, everybody had the same size room, everybody got the same food, everybody had the same clothes. If you were more productive in the box factory or in the orchard, you didn't make more money, you didn't get a bigger room, you didn't get a bigger house, your kids didn't get fancier musical instruments. It's a beautiful idea. Same ideas in many places, a commune, right? Everything is shared. I think that appeals deeply to us. It also has a problem because there's a part of us, we like fairness, meaning everybody gets the same, but we also kind of have a sense that people who work harder maybe should get more. Is that fair? You could say it's fair. I think we feel that it's fair. But when you think about it, the people who work harder are usually the people who had parents who encourage them to work harder. Maybe they're genetically, their nature is such that they tend to work harder. Is it really fair that if your parents pushed you to work hard, that you should have the bigger room? The fair thing starts to get very complicated very quickly. So in a separate set of essays, I'm not going to talk about today, but I'll send them to you if you write me, I argue that I do not deserve what I have. Very unpopular viewpoint among people who have things. Most people who have things think they've earned them and deserve them. I think that's a hard case to make But despite that, even though I think I don't deserve what I have, I don't believe in socialism, okay? I don't believe in socialism. So that's a longer argument. The simple idea is this. I'll get to it in a little bit, actually. I'm going to hold off on that. But what I want to talk about today in my remaining time is an argument you hear all the time in the United States. I'm sure you hear it here also. It is supported by data and statistics, and it's very, seems to be true. And that argument is that under free markets, under capitalism, the poor people get almost nothing and the rich people get all the gains. Have you heard that argument? Heard that argument before? There's a problem with that argument historically, because certainly historically, everybody is better off by an enormous amount than people who lived 100 years ago. And you'd have to explain why. And as a free market person, I think it's true because of things that are capitalist, the use of markets, the decentralized opportunity for people to exchange with one another. But people would say, oh, well, that was then. But now the system is, we would say in English, rigged. Do you know that word? Rigged? How would you say it בעברית? מה? מכור? מכור? מem? מכור. Unfair, cheating. That the people at the top have made the rules so that they can get all the benefits. And you know what? It's true. It's true. In any democracy and in any dictatorship, under democracy, under dictatorship, under a monarchy with a king, the big, powerful people have found ways to get more. They already have a lot, they want more. Give me one example in Israel of how rich people use the system to take advantage and get more than other people. I would say real estate. Right, if you own real estate right now in Israel, you can make a lot of money. And the idea that new real estate would become available and reduce the value of your wealth is very unappealing to rich people. They don't like it. So it's not surprising that they fight that. It's not surprising. They have fancy arguments for why they would fight it. They wouldn't say to keep me rich. That's awkward. People don't like to say that. So they have another argument. It's good for the country, it's good for congestion, for traffic?
Kakim.
Kakim. That's the reason. It's for the environment. It's not for me to have, we can't have more buildings. It'd be bad for the environment. But actually, it's also for you. So it's true that in many systems of any kind, communism, socialism in reality, capitalism in reality, the people at the top have ways to keep what they have and sometimes to take more. But the question is how much? And is there an opportunity for people who are not at the top to rise? And people believe now in the United States that there is little opportunity to rise for people except at the very top. So I'm going to show you some of the evidence for that, okay? And I have a very simple goal today. I just want to teach you it's more complicated than you might think. Okay. So this is the kind of graph people show all the time in the United States. Whenever you see a graph like this, now if it supports what you already believe in, if it's consistent with your view of the world, you say, well, look at that. It speaks for itself. Look at it. It's obvious that fill in the blank. My side's right. It's obvious. Look, I have the data. The problem is the data, there are many kinds of data. When anybody says studies show that, it's a lie, more or less. It's often true. There is a study once that showed, but they don't tell you about the 20 studies that showed something else because they don't want to think about those, right? So studies show is one of the most dangerous phrases in intellectual life. And people say it as if it's over. There's nothing more to talk about. Look, the study showed that But of course, there's 50 assumptions that had to be made to get to this result, and some of them lead to a different outcome. And they don't show you all the results. So let's look at this one. So this is average hourly earnings. In America, a lot of people are paid by the hour. It's not a bad measure of how people are doing. Now, normally you would not use an average. Does anybody know why? Raise your hand. Why would you not want to use the average? What's your name again? Donna.
Yeah, because it doesn't show the truth.
Why?
Because you have extreme.
You have extremes. With an average, you just know the average. You don't know what's happening at the upper end and the lower end. And in particular, what's the biggest problem with using the average?
The Mediterranean part, like
What?
the
Median?
median. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to, right. What, the median's better, right? Why?
Because it shows where most of the population is, and it's not that.
The problem is that with a non-normal distribution, there could be an outlier. So who's the richest person in Israel right now? Give me one.
Sherry Allison.
What's
Sherry Allison.
Shelley?
Sherry.
Sherry?
Harrison.
Arison. Sherry Arison, let's say. She walks in the room. What happens to the average income in the room? Goes up a lot. What happened to our income? Nothing. The average is not representative sometimes of what we would say in everyday language, the average. Because by everyday language, by average, what do we mean? Typical, representative, right? When Sherry Arison walks in the room, the average goes up, but the typical income doesn't change at all, right? Yeah.
Economy is there is a connection between our incomes. It's not like she's walking here in the room and we don't have some connection.
Which way does it go? Let me ask you this, because I don't know what Sherry does. I've only been here 6 weeks. It's a handicap. But in America, who's the richest? Who would you say? Give me somebody you could say is the richest person in America. Jeff Bezos, okay? Jeff Bezos is fabulously wealthy. By the way, there's two measures of rich that we could think of. One is wealth and one is income. Income is what you earn every period regularly. Wealth is what? How much you've accumulated in the past, or the value of your assets, your stocks, your real estate, and so on. Jeff Bezos, I would argue, has made me very rich. What would be one reason that could be true?
You can get
What?
you can buy things of Amazon and get them.
I was going to say because I could own the stock of Amazon. I don't, that I know of. I might. I have some mutual funds. I could own Amazon stock, and I probably have some. But certainly the reason he's made me rich is that for a long time, he's been selling books at $10, $20 a book. And guess what? For about 10, 15 years, he lost money on every one of those and gave that money to me. It's great. Thank you, Jeff. Love it. Really appreciate it. You're a great guy. So in this case, his wealth benefited me. But sometimes someone's wealth takes away from me, right? We talked about the examples of the cartels in Israel, somebody who restricts the supply of eggs or honey or some agricultural product in Israel is making money at my expense. They're not helping me. They're costing me money, right? Okay, so average generally is a bad idea, except for this case, because this is the average for a certain group of workers, people who are not CEOs, not bosses, not managers, right? They're just called production and non-supervisory. That means they're not in charge. So they are just the regular workers. So there aren't any outliers in there, very few. These are not lawyers, doctors, baseball players, singers, athletes, movie stars. They're not in this data. So in that sense, average is a pretty good place to start. And what happened between 1974 or 73 and 2014 in this data? The average worker made no progress. They lost money. That bottom line, the line at the end, is 6% lower than it was at the beginning. Now, it just so happens during this time, the American economy grew tremendously. Huge fortunes were made. And yet, this suggests that for the average person, they shared none of it. None. Not only none of it, they're further behind. Something is wrong with the American economy, according to this picture. Now, one of the things you'd have to ask is, well, what do you mean by earnings? Does that include benefits? Does that include the health care that might be provided? Does that include retirement contributions? The answer is no, it does not. So it's deceptive because it leaves those things out. But it's still kind of disturbing that the cash income of what looks to be the average worker in America was not just flat, it's essentially flat. -6 is like 0, but it's 0. Should have doubled or gone up 20%, 30%, something bigger. But there's a big problem, even if you include benefits, which is it's deflated. I'll talk about that in a second. It's deflated with what's called the CPIU, the Consumer Price Index, CPI, Consumer Price Index U, for urban consumers. And what it tries to do, the CPIU, is measure the cost of a bundle of goods that are urban, meaning a person who lives in a city, what they buy. So if my income doubles, but what I buy also doubles, what happened to my well-being? Nothing. Unchanged, right? You could say, well, but you have twice as much money. But no, you don't, because what you care about is what? What the money buys. You don't care about the number. You care about what we would say in English, your command, your ability to enjoy goods and services. And if I just look at income, I can't do that. That's not going to tell me how many goods and services I can enjoy. I have to deflate, meaning correct for inflation, correct for changes in prices. So, when you correct for the changes in prices, you get 0, no benefit, no improvement, no change. But if you use a different measure of inflation, what does that mean, a different measure? I thought you just told me you take the bundle of goods and you see what happened to the cost of the bundle and you compare that to how much income went up. But when you start to think about it, you realize that's kind of hard to do, right? Because you have to decide what's in the bundle. And it could be that, and it will be, that a lot of things that used to be in the bundle aren't in the bundle anymore. And what do you do with that? And then you have a much bigger problem, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute, which is the quality of what's in the bundle hasn't stayed the same. So, my favorite example of this is the iPod. Remember iPods? You guys aren't even old enough to know what an iPod is. An iPod was a little thing that looked like a phone that held music. When it first came out, it was $399, and it held, think about this. Think how sad it was for people. When did it come out? I don't remember. 2008, 6, 9, 11, 10, 15 years ago. It was $399, and it only held 1,000 songs. Now, if you had told someone then, and they did, oh, you're only going to have 1,000 songs to choose from, people would say they would break down a large door and crawl on broken glass to get a device that for $399 you can put in your pocket and have the choice of 1,000 songs. But now, the iPod, it doesn't really exist anymore, but at one point, it was, maybe you could still buy a Nano, but at one point, 6 years later, it had fallen in price by $50. It was $349, and it held 40,000 songs. It went from 1,000 to 40,000. So was it better? Yes, it was. It also got smaller. Its battery lasted longer. So how much cheaper is it? Well, it's at least $50 cheaper, but it's really much more than $50 cheaper. And if all you look at is the price of the bundle, you're going to miss the changes in the quality. And by the way, this is 12, 15 years ago, whatever it was. 100 years ago, if you wanted to have 1,000 songs in your pocket, you had to hire a group of musicians to follow you around and play music for you who knew 1,000 songs. It's an incredible transformation. What's the price of an iPod today? Who cares, right? I have Spotify on my phone. Think about this. I mean, this is I really do. I think this is one of the greatest things in the history of humanity. I happen to believe music is not just like, oh, it's nice, like a well-cooked meal. No, music is like central to the human experience. So now I have to pay per month for Spotify. I pay $10 a month, $120 a month. And I have not 1,000, not 40,000, but I have 40 million songs. It's so great. And the quality, you guys don't remember what, because you never saw them, but these things called long-playing records, things made out of plastic, they get scratched and they sound bad after a while. You'd have to wash them with a fancy thing. The turntable was always broken. I get super high-quality music that's exactly the same as every time I play it, and I have 40 million songs to choose. I mean, it's spectacular, but how do you value that? Right? What's the price of portable music? It's very complicated to measure. So I tried to make a video that would show that. It was a video I made to try to capture the idea that if I gave you a choice between 1973 and today, I'm going to give you all your money today. I'm not going to even deflate it. I'm going to let you have all your money today. The only problem is you could only buy good. You're going to get to pay 1973 prices, okay? Oh, it's so cheap. It's so cheap. But you only get goods that were available in 1973, okay? You have to have 1973 quality. So this is about 50 years ago. This is like, for you, the Middle Ages, right? You know, the Crusades, Exodus from Egypt. A long time ago, right? A long time ago, 1973. I was 19. Anyway, here we go. And more hair. But I was fatter, I think. I walk a lot more here. It's much better for me. My wife hates this. Hates it. Oh lot of people claim the average American hasn't made much economic progress over the last 30 to 40 years. In the first 3 episodes of this series, I tried to show there's more to the story. The average American and the poor got richer as the economy grew. But I think those gains, if anything, are even bigger than the cheery numbers I shared. So what I was trying to show in the first 3 parts, which we're not going to see today, is that actually the poor have done pretty well. We're going to see a little bit of that in the last video I'm going to show in a little bit. But my point is that even when you correct the data, it's still incomplete. That's because all the attempts to measure economic progress, gloomy or cheerful, require an accurate measure of inflation. Measuring inflation is harder than you might think. Here's a Sony color TV from the early 1970s, 21-inch screen, about $600. And here's a Sony today that's $500. Which is cheaper? That one, but how much cheaper? So it looks like the price of the TV fell by about 16%. But the $500 Sony is more than twice as big. Does that mean the price is 32% lower today? Because I get twice as much for my money? That old TV only got a few channels. Today's gets about 1,000. It doesn't break. You can play video games on it. The picture's about a zillion times sharper. And what about the 65-inch Sony that's $1,800 today? Is that 3 times the price of a 1970s TV? Would you consider the 1970s Sony a bargain? And then again, I watch almost all my TV shows on my laptop. So is the price of a TV 0 now compared to the past? So just how much a price has gone up or down? It's really hard to measure precisely when the quality of what we buy is improving rapidly. Ironically, when goods and services get better over time, the more likely it is that inflation will be overestimated and changes in the standard of living underestimated. It might look like we're standing still or falling behind when economic life is actually getting a lot better. To get the full picture, behind this problem, let's use a little bit of economics imagination. Imagine you have the chance to go shopping today with your current income, but you can pay the prices of So here's the experiment. You take your current income, and your income today is much higher than the average income of 1970, right? But you get to pay 1973 prices. What does that mean? It should mean that your standard of living is going to go up a lot because you're paying much lower prices. You understand? You should have access to your shopping cart, should be able to have a lot more stuff in it, right? Let's see. Of 1973. Now, according to the PCE, a commonly used price index, prices today are about 5 times higher than in 1973. If that's right, whatever your income is today, letting you pay 1973 prices means it should be about 5 times richer. But there's a catch, right? Today's income, old prices, you should have 5 times the stuff in your cart that you could have had in 1973. When you go shopping in this imaginary world, you don't just get the 1973 prices, you also get the 1973 goods and services. So when you go to buy a car, the Honda Civic they show you. So in 1973, the price of a Honda Civic was $1,973. Well, clever marketing idea that they had at the time. So that's really cheap. A car in America today is about an inexpensive, not fancy car. It's 18 to 22,000. So it looks like, wow, I'm going to have a car, and I'm only going to have to spend $1,973. But of course, as we'll see, the car in 1973 isn't quite the same car. It's the 1973 model. It's a bit stripped down, sure, but it's only $1,973. That's what they look like, by the way. That's a photograph. That's what a car looked like in 1973. It was like metal with a radio and one or two gauges. $1,973, really. Clever marketing back then. Or you could splurge and get yourself a Corvette for under $7,000. The Corvette of 1973 only got about 14 miles per gallon, but that's okay. Gas is only 36 cents a gallon. Your house is going to be a lot cheaper, healthcare's cheaper, so is your kid's education. Stanford tuition is less than $3,000. Now it's about $50 a year. That frees up a lot of money to buy more stuff and load up your cart. You can buy anything you want from the 1973 Sears catalog. Polyester pants, the same as those worn here by golfing great Johnny Miller, only $16.95. You don't have to settle for the 21-inch TV. You can easily afford the biggest color television in the catalog, a giant 25-incher, for $719. Of course, it only gets 10 channels, and the picture's not too sharp. There's one other catch. I'm only going to let you buy goods and services that were available in 1973. You can't have any of today's goods that middle-class consumers enjoy if they weren't available back then. I'm not talking about yachts or caviar, but the everyday goods that most Americans can afford. So no smartphone, no rear-view camera when you're backing up your car, no GPS, no airbags in that bargain price Corvette, no Waze to get you home, but you can buy a map for next to nothing at that gas station, charging 36 cents a gallon. No Google, Facebook, Twitter, Yelp, and no educational economics videos on YouTube, or videos on how to carve a turkey, play the Malfouf rhythm, or learn the difference between the United Kingdom, Britain, and England. No Fortnite, Minecraft, or whatever's the hot game when you end up watching this video. But there's a pinball machine at the convenience store in the corner, and it's only 25 cents a game. You can play it for hours. Heck, you guys know what that is? Pinball machine? With your income and the prices you face, you can just buy yourself a pinball machine if you want. For only $24.50, you get a portable cassette recorder that you can carry wherever you go. After all, it only weighs 3 pounds. No 10,000 songs on the phone in your pocket, no Spotify. But cassettes are pretty light, you can carry a bunch. If you're having a heart attack, good news, that visit to the emergency room's a lot cheaper. The doctors will give you aspirin, but no clotbusters or stents or balloon angioplasty. None of those were available in 1973. Would you take the deal? Would you give up the new products and the quality? So that's the question. Would you take the deal? Would you like to have prices that are 1/5 of prices today, but the quality of the goods of that time, and none of the goods available that you can enjoy now that weren't available then? And I think the answer to that for most people, not everybody, but for most people is, I don't like that. I like what I have now, which means that the price index is not a very accurate measure of how much your income can buy. So that's a problem. The quality improvements of the last 40 years for the chance to pay 1973 prices. And just to make it fair, let's assume no one else has a smartphone or Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or Instagram either, so you're not alone on some kind of tech-free island while your friends are all playing with social media. If you're hesitating, and I think a lot of people would, maybe the PCE and other price indices don't accurately capture the change in your purchasing power over long periods of time. Paying 1973 prices for 1973 quality goods and services wouldn't make you 5 times richer. You might even be worse off. That means our measures of inflation and the change in our standard of living aren't off by little, they're off by a lot. The average American is almost certainly doing a lot better than the standard number suggests. Okay, so enough of that. So the point is that to correct for inflation when goods are changing in quality and availability is hard to do accurately. You can't really do it reliably. How important that is, I think it's important. You might or might not. But I want to take us to the next example. So here's the first one we looked at. This is the same data using a different price index, the PCE, different way of handling the bundle of goods. Neither, I argue, corrects very accurately for changes in quality. The difference is that it goes from being a negative 6% to a positive 17%. Now, 17% is not so great either, but it's not negative 6. It's not a trivial difference, but it's not a big difference. And then there's this picture, which I think is the most troubling picture for most people. This is what are called quintiles, chamishon, a fifth. You divide, you take the population. Is it a chamishon? Okay, it happens. 1 out of 10, you know. So what this is, we divide the economy. We take all the workers or people or households or families. These are all different choices you could make. We divide them into fifths, 20%. So there's the bottom 20%, then there's 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80, and then the top 20%. What does this picture show? It's pretty clear. Summarize it for Twitter. What would you say is the bottom line here? Raise your hand. Yeah. The rich get richer and the poor get nothing, get no change. They're stuck. Now, the upper 20%, the one that's 60 to 80, the red line there, it looks a little higher, right? Clearly, these guys are doing great. This group's doing, looks like some improvement, but these are the bottom 60% of the workforce. What's happening to them? Ephes, nothing, no change, they're stuck. And this is a time, again, where everybody, the economy as a whole is doing great, But if the economy as a whole is doing great and the bottom 60% are getting none of it, you know what we should have? A revolution. We really should. This is atrocious. This is horrifying. I don't think it's right, but it's not cheating. There's no fraud. Do you understand what I'm saying? When these graphs, you'll see them all the time. When they get created and put into magazines, newspapers, websites, they're not dishonest. They're actually correctly using the data, but the data aren't saying what they think it is. What do they think it's saying? How would you summarize what is happening in the picture again? For the, let's say, the top 20%, how would you describe it? You said the rich get richer. But that's not what, yeah.
I think that like some of the like red line groups have moved to the yellow groups.
That some of them have, but you don't know that because the way this chart is created, and this is the whole main point. This is very simple. I'm going to show you another video that shows this. But the way these data get created is that in 1980, 40 years ago, they took all the people and divided them into fifths. The 20% that were the poorest, the next 20%, and so on. And the top was making about $140,000 a year, and the bottom was making about 12. So it's about 12 times higher in 1980. By 2014, the top is at about 200, and the bottom is still at about 12. So now it's about 20 times, 18 times higher. So clearly, according to this picture, the rich have gotten richer. But when you say in English or Ivrit, the rich are richer, that phrase, the betui hazeh, this phrase has two meanings. Think about this very carefully. When I say the rich get richer, that can mean two different things. Number one, the people who were rich in 1980 got richer 40 years later. That's the rich got richer. But it's also the people who were rich in 1980 were not as rich as the people who were rich in 2014, and they're not the same people. But the people who were rich, whoever they were, as you were suggesting, the people who were richer than before. Those are two very different things. So here's the video that shows that challenge. Sorry. And I'm almost done, and then we'll open it up for questions. Okay, so let me say it again. The video will illustrate it, but I'll say it beforehand. The example I use, one of the examples I use is basketball, okay? So in 1980, the two best basketball players in the world were Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. And they made a lot of money. They made a lot of money. If I say the rich got richer, does that mean that these two people who in 1980 were some of the richest people in America, by 2014 were making a lot more than before? And they were a little bit, because they were doing things other than basketball. But just that complicates the story. Or does it mean that the basketball players in 2014 who were different, like today it's Steph Curry and Kevin Durant and LeBron James, they make more than the rich people who played in 1980? They could both be true, of course, right? They could both be true. It could be that the rich got here's the really complicated, here's a really simple way to illustrate the complicated thing. When you say the rich got richer, you're making it sound like it's a club. It's a group of people inside a fence who are able to make the world work on their behalf, and they all over time get bigger and bigger shares of the economic pie. The other possibility is that people move up and down as time passes, and at the end, there are people who are really rich, who are richer than the richest people back then, but they're not the same people. Now, it's also true that there could be lots of poor people down here in today. But it's complicated, because if you have immigration, right? If you have, like, I gave the example of Sherry Arison coming in here. What if we had a bunch of really poor people come in here? People with low skills, low education. because our economy created opportunities for them and they came here. What would happen to the average income? It would go down, but it wouldn't mean we were worse off. That's the real distinction I'm trying to make. So let's see if
Poor people stay, I mean, even if there are different people, poor people of today, they have the same.
they're very poor. But the question is, what's their lifetime expectation? So in the United States, again, I don't know what it's like in Israel. In the United States, a lot of people come to America who are very poor, but they don't stay poor. Their children aren't poor. Their children go to college. They don't. They can't speak English, and they have no skills. They come to America, their children get to go to high school, go to college, and they make a lot more money. So it's true. By the way, when people say America's a horrible place to be poor, I always wonder why people risk their lives to come to America. They'll swim, literally swim from Cuba to leave a state that is supposed to be very fair to be poor, desperately poor in America. But they come because they think their children will not be poor. And so, yes, they will be poor when they get here. And the bottom in 2014 is still very low. It's 12 or whatever the number is, corrected for inflation. It's actually higher, but when you correct for inflation, in theory, even if you did it perfectly, it still would not have gone up very much because the people who come here are very low, have low skills, come to America. Sorry, not here. Forgot for a minute. Oleh Chadash. Mamash. Having said that, very important point. There are people in America who cannot rise, who are handicapped, and I know it's true here too. And I'll close, I'll talk about that. So we'll come more to that. You've probably seen a picture like this before. Incomes corrected for inflation, measuring how much stuff people can buy and how that changes over time. The rich get richer, and the poor get poorer, and the middle class barely gets ahead. But when someone says the rich get richer, what does that really mean? It could mean that the richest people in 1980 were 50% richer by 2014, the poor people of 1980 never got a raise, and as for the middle class, they got crumbs, a crummy 10% gain over 34 years. The studies that use numbers like these create a lot of outrage, and reasonably so. It sure looks like the rich get all the gains from economic growth. It's why Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz can claim that the U.S. economy is rigged in favor of the rich. Why Nobel laureate Paul Krugman can say wages for ordinary workers have been stagnant since the 1970s. And why New York Times columnist David Leonard can say that the very affluent and only the very affluent have received significant raises in recent decades. But this picture doesn't actually tell you that. Almost all the gloomy evidence that people use showing the rich getting all the gains, like this chart, take a snapshot each year and compare the snapshot today with one from the past to see how people have been doing. But it's not the same people in the snapshots. The economy is dynamic. People move up and down. They have good years and bad ones. People leave school, start working. People retire. Some die. Some of the people in the top 20% today weren't rich to start with. Some of the people at the top today weren't even born in 1980, like NBA superstar Stephen Curry or Google founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin. Some of the ones in the middle today used to be at the top. So it isn't necessarily true that the rich got richer. Maybe the people in the past who weren't rich became rich, and they ended up richer than the rich who were rich yesterday. So they show up in the snapshot of the top 20% in 2014 because they're richer today than the rich people of the past. It looks like the rich captured all the gains. Same with the poor falling behind. Maybe those who are poor now are younger and less skilled than the poor of the past. That will make it look like poor people are losing ground, but maybe the poor of the past actually got ahead and aren't poor anymore. So that's all interesting. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. The point is that to answer the question that we really care about, you have to have data that follows people over time. These data, the picture I showed you that are depressing, those are taking a snapshot. They're taking a look in 1 year of all the people and comparing it to all the people a different year, if they're not the same people, it doesn't tell you what happened to their life trajectory, their path. Let's see what happens when you do that. Or we'll get ahead too. So which story's right? Who's prospered in America? Just the rich? Or has prosperity been widely shared? To answer those questions, you can't use a series of snapshots. You need to follow the same people over time, like a movie. And when you do that, you find that a good chunk of the gains go to the poor and the middle class. And sometimes the rich are the ones whose incomes are stuck in place or falling. A Brookings study by Julia Isaacs for the Pew Foundation looked at how people did as grown-ups compared to their parents. What happened to kids whose parents were in the bottom 20% with median income of just over $20,000? When those kids entered the workforce, did they make more than their parents, or were they stuck in place making no progress? It turns out they did a lot better, twice as well in absolute terms. The kids who grew up in the richest households, the top 20% whose parents had median income of $100,000, ended up with the same income as their parents. The children who grew up in the middle. You understand? If you follow the same people over time, the rich people, they're doing great, by the way. I'm not saying you should feel sorry for them, but they don't get that picture that we saw at the beginning. And the poor people aren't flat. Their children end up twice as wealthy, twice as well off as they are. These are all corrected for inflation, by the way. Imperfectly, of course. People made 27% more than their parents. The poorest children had the biggest absolute and percentage gains when they grew up. That's partly due to what's called regression to the mean. If your parents had bad luck, and that's part of the reason they ended up poor, you're more likely to have average luck and do better. Similarly, if your parents are rich, partly because they had especially good luck, you're not as likely to have good luck yourself, so you're not as likely to do as well as they did. But that doesn't change the reality that over the last 3 decades of the 20th century, kids from poorer families gained more ground relative to their parents than kids from richer families. In the gloomy pictures, there's no regression to the mean. Only the rich make progress and everyone else is treading water. But it's not true. The passage of time narrowed the gaps between the top and the bottom. Here's a different study that follows the same people over time, using tax data. It looks at people 35 to 40 years old in 1987 and the percentage change in their income 20 years later. The biggest percentage gains? The people who started in the lowest quintile. Their income doubled over the 20 years, just as it did in the Brookings study. The people who started in the middle quintile gained 27%, just like in the Brookings study. And the people who were in the top quintile in 1987 were actually 5% worse off 20 years later. In a recent working paper, Yonatan Berman of the Paris School of Economics. I'm not going to show you the whole video. You can finish it, watch it yourself if you want. I have a long essay where I summarize all these studies, including the work by Raj Chetty and his co-authors that's very critical of the American economy, and I suggest that he's overly critical. But my point is very simple, that the pictures you usually see do not take account of what actually happens to poor people. And it turns out they actually get the rich, aren't the ones who get richer, it's the poor. Having said that, 2 important points. It's still a big gap between the top and the bottom, and you may decide it's too big. You want to do something about it. You want to have higher taxes, and you want to have more benefits for people at the bottom. And it's also the case, very important, that there are people at the bottom who don't get ahead. The average doubled in that study that I just showed you. Remember, not all studies should be trusted. In fact, no study should be trusted. I have multiple studies. That helps. What's important about this video and the essay I wrote is that they're different methodologies. They're different ways of looking at the data, and they tell you very different things about the state of the economy. I'm not going to tell you, oh, the cheerful ones are right and the depressing ones are wrong. What I'm telling you is that the picture is more complicated than the one you usually hear. But having said all that, the people at the very bottom have a hard time getting ahead. Why? A lot of reasons. Sometimes they come from families that don't give them a work ethic, that don't encourage them to work. Sometimes, often, almost always in America, I suspect here as well, the schools they go to are horrible. Horrible. They don't learn a set of skills that are outside the classroom, right? About how to behave. They're not easily integrated into the labor market, into the job market. It's a big problem. This has nothing to do with that. I'm not saying everything's great. Oh, all the stories you hear are wrong. I think a lot of what you hear is wrong, but it doesn't mean there aren't problems with the current way that the economy organizes the economic life of our citizens, either here in Israel or in the United States or in any Western country or in any other country. It doesn't matter. There are people at the bottom who don't have a good chance, and it's horrible. So my view is that we should fix, improve, change the school system. I would get the government out of schools, by the way. Somebody asked me, I think it was you. Was it you who asked me about health care? Somebody asked me on Monday, like, you do believe in socialized medicine, national health care, right? Was that you? And I said, no, I don't. Now, why it is that a seemingly nice person who is good to his children and his wife, who Bob Borans loves almost like his own son, why such a person would be against national health care is a puzzle, right? So I'd have to explain, if I make that case, I have to make an argument very important for why in my world that I imagine poor people would be taken care of. Right now, poor people are taken care of in England and in Israel. Not so much in the United States. We do have a welfare program for poor people. It's called Medicaid. It's all right, not very good. It's pretty good. But the United States has a horrible healthcare system, in my view, but not because it's not socialized. Longer story. I have an essay on that too if you want. Write me. But my point is that the school system is atrocious. Now, it has disadvantages. It's not all the fault of the schools, because a lot of times the families the children come from or have difficult situations. They don't have enough money. They don't have enough food. There's violence. They don't have two parents. There's a lot of things that handicap people to enter into the world as adults to be successful. But I don't want anything I said today to suggest, oh, so there's nothing to worry about. Everything's good. Leave it alone. No, it's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the data that are usually used to advance particular policies are deceptive. And by deceptive, I don't mean necessarily that the people who put them out are trying to trick you. I'm saying they don't capture the whole story. Okay, so that's my bottom line. Let's take some questions. Yeah.
In the video that you showed us, like the bottom layer, like the poorest people, I understood that their children
end up doing better.
Yeah, but at the end, there is still pretty steady, no?
Right, but it's come back to your question. It's not the same. The poorest people are very poor now compared to 40 years ago. They're much better off than the poorest people 100 years ago, right? 100 years ago, your chances of dying in childbirth were very high. Your chances of living past the age of 5, not good. You had you had to work many more hours. You had less leisure, right? Life was much harder as a poor person in 1900 or 1800 or 1500 than now. But what the picture does show is that the poorest people now are pretty much the same economically as the poorest people 40 years ago. What's my answer to that? I have a really easy answer. What's my easy answer? They're not the same people. That's not my easy answer. What? No, that's a good answer. That's not my easy answer. My easy answer is from my other video. My easy answer is they look like they're the same, but actually even those poor people wouldn't want to go back to 1973 and be poor. They're not equal. It's actually a much better life today. They have a car. They have central air conditioning. They have a dishwasher. They have a microwave. They have a cell phone. All those things they didn't have in 1973. So we say it's flat. It's not quite as depressing, I think, as it looks. But again, I don't disagree that if you have limited skills in the world, in a modern economy, you struggle to advance. And in addition, if you have free trade, which I'm a big fan of, you will find yourself, if you have no skills, in competition with people in other countries that have no skills. And those workers are paid a lot less than you, and that's going to limit the ability of you to earn money in your own country. Do you understand the point? If you have very little skills, in the old days, you could work in a factory that didn't require a college degree, and you could make a pretty good living in the United States, at least. I don't know about Israel. You can make a pretty good living. That's not true anymore, because you're now competing with workers in China who have very little skills, and they make a fraction of what your job costs, so a lot more jobs are going to be in China. Okay, another question. Yeah.
I wonder what would be the case for somebody that address poverty as a social concept. So it doesn't matter if the life of poor people today are much better.
Excellent point. Keep going.
It's matter like the inequality is what matters. The
Okay.
idea social.
Excellent. Now, let me ask you this. Do you want to see what Sherry Arison's house looks like? I don't know, has her house ever been on TV? Yes, probably. Is there a magazine about it, a magazine article? Like we joked, right? We joked about the Kardashians on Monday, right? Do people like to see how rich people live?
Yes.
Why? Does it make you depressed? Have you ever had a friend who made more money than you and you go to their house? Sometimes you get angry inside. You might be jealous, right? You might say, why is this person who's not nearly as smart as I am, or as good looking, or as tall? I'm much taller than them. Why is it that they have so much stuff and I have relatively little? So inequality is not irrelevant. It matters. It can be particularly hard in a family, right? You might be very jealous of a sibling who for some reason it makes more money than you. You might have chosen a job that has lots of non-monetary benefits, right? For most of my life, I earned much less than my siblings, my sister and brother. I have a PhD. I went to school for 4 years. How can they make more than I do? It's not fair. It didn't bother me. One of the reasons it didn't bother me is because I'm free market, so I kind of just say that's life. I could have chosen to do what they did if I wanted. Maybe I'd make even more, maybe not. Doesn't matter to me. Second, I love my job. Third, one of the reasons I love my job is that part of my income is in non-monetary ways, right? Look at this. See this? This is fun, right? Bob pays me a pittance, almost nothing. A few shekels on the floor. I even have to pick them up. Just kidding, Bob. But part of the reason I come isn't for the money, right? It's for this. So if I have a job that I love and my siblings have a job that they find stressful, I'm really happy. I actually have higher pay, right? It's not just the money, okay? So 2 things to your question. One is you could suffer knowing that there are other people who make much more than you, or you could say, not that important. I like my life. I'm not going to compare myself to other people. But I think there's a deeper point you're making, which I think I'm not sure was what you were getting at, which is money really, is this really what we fight? This is really what we fight about in America right now among economists. Who makes more money? Do the rich get richer? By how much? I think that's too much. Taxes should be higher. All of it is focused on one thing and one thing only, and what is it? Money. But guess what? The goal of life is not to accumulate the most toys, right? No one on their deathbed wished they'd spent more time at the office. How much is in your shopping cart is not a measure of the value of your life. Everybody knows that, right? But we act in policy as if that's all there is. And you know why, in my view? Because you can measure it. The stuff that really matters, you can't measure. Happiness, satisfaction, meaning. Those are the things that really matter. And now I'm going to come back to your point, though, and agree with you. The biggest problem among the poor isn't that they don't have enough stuff. They don't, maybe. That's a legitimate thing to look at, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is they don't have any meaning. They don't have a life that gives them satisfaction. They don't feel important. They don't have dignity. Dignity, Bivrit. What is it? What is it? Yoshra. Yoshra? Look. Ma? Here's what I mean by dignity. I look at myself and I look at my life and I'm proud. Yesh li kavod atzmo. Ken? How would you say that? Kavod atzmo. Self-respect, right? Dignity means also that what I do with my life and time I respect what it is, right? Right? There are a lot of jobs that pay a lot of money where you don't feel dignified. you feel dirty, right? Or unimportant. I think that's the much bigger problem. We have an economy, not through anyone's fault, it's not a conspiracy. We have an economy where a bunch of people, it's all of us, have a great opportunity, unlike any time in human history, to dream, to do something fantastic, to take your gifts and use them out in the world to serve other people commercially in business or in amutah, in a nonprofit way, right? It's an incredible time. I'll get to it one sec. It's an incredible time, but not everybody gets to be part of that. And part of the reason is because of the reality of life. Not everybody has the skills and gifts, and it's hard. But the second reason is we handicap them, the poorest people. We don't give them the education that we had. And that's horrible. It's a tragedy. Yeah.
But it's more than education. Don't you think that maybe one of the reasons for the poor being stuck where they are is because we give them social security, like the black community in the US, and then they stuck and they actually don't want to go work. It doesn't.
Yeah, I have very mixed. I would not phrase. Let me partially agree with you. It's more than just skills. It's family. I mean, Econ talked this week with Jim Heckman about the fact that family is much more important than we often think it is. We think we can substitute social services and other things to make up for the gaps in people's family existence. It's a real issue. Welfare, which is what you're talking about, is... let me use a different example. A lot of people are in favor of universal basic income. The idea that every person would get a minimum amount from the government. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, there's some good things about it and some bad things about it. But one of the things that's bad about it, which I think you're getting at, is an idea that you would be paid to do nothing, effectively. You'd be paid to be what we would say in English, a ward of the state. You'd be dependent, okay? But I really don't think that is the biggest problem with poor people in America. I don't think that's the biggest problem with the black community in America. I think the biggest problem with the black community in America and the poorest white people in America is that they are in situations where they don't have the skills. And whether those skills are formal education or family experience, it's a combination. Yeah.
It seems like you talked about the quality of life more than what you earn, but what your value, dignity, and such. It feels like today in Israel and also in America, maybe the younger generation feels like more depressed or more pessimistic about the future.
I agree.
And they feel like they don't get what they
I agree.
Can you think your answer to why?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a couple thoughts. I don't know the answer why. I was talking with some of you Monday about this. We were talking a little bit afterward. Culturally, tarbut, culturally, the world is in great upheaval, chaos. Religion is dying. The family is dying. Those are the two things to keep in mind. People are not getting married. When they get married later. And the number of people who never get married is at an all-time high. In America, I suspect it's rising here in Israel. And I think if you don't have family, you don't have religion, you got to find something else. For many people, it's their work, right? Many people find their work to be deeply satisfying to their sense of self. Other people find their church, their synagogue, their mosque as a source of deep satisfaction. For other people, it's their family, it's their children, it's their parents, the time they spend with their family. All three are nice, by the way. I'm a big fan of all three. I love my job, I love being Jewish, I love my family. They're all incredibly important to me. But what if you don't have any of those? What if you don't believe in God, you're not married, and your family doesn't live where you live in a city with a bunch of strangers, and you hate your job? You're not going to be in a very good mood. You're going to look for something else. It might be sports. It might be violence. It might be drugs. right? Human beings are very poorly designed for modernity. It's a common argument. I'm somewhat sympathetic to it. The argument that we're poorly designed for modernity, for modern life, right? We're designed for a very different world, right? A world of physicality, a world of being outside, a world of... I spent a lot of episodes of Econ Talk thinking about this with people. There's no right answer. But I think what is undeniably true is that there is an unusual amount of despair. Atzuvot? I don't know what despair is, but you've read. What is it? What is it? Yarush? Dikaon? Yarush? There's a lot of despair in America. There's a lot of people dying from drug overdose. Last year, 90,000 people died of drug overdoses in America compared to 70,000 the year before. That's like a 30% increase. That's a big number. Something's wrong. Somebody who goes out and kills a bunch of strangers, something's wrong. It's not, we should have stopped him from getting a gun. Well, that's a nice idea. We're not very good at it. We don't know how to do it in America. And everybody here has a gun, and it doesn't happen very much here. So it can't just be the gun. And you have somebody who thinks, what kind of a world is there where someone thinks, I know what I'll do. I'll go kill as many people I don't know today. Something is sick. Something is grotesquely wrong. It has nothing to do, in my view, with economics in the sense of material things. It has to do with something missing. There's a hole somewhere in that person's heart. And economists are not the right people to answer that question. They don't know anything about it. They don't even understand it. Psychologists, in theory, should know something about it. I don't think they have a policy solution. You know what their solution is? Strangely enough, we need more mental health services, which, just happens to be good for them. Maybe it's a coincidence. They believe in what they do, which is lovely. But every group seems to think, that their expertise is what's missing. There's really a possibility that the whole thing is maybe not so healthy. I don't know. Another question? Yeah.
I have two questions. One is related to what you just said now, because I'm just curious. Don't you think that there are new replacements for religion? I don't know, things that bring people hope, things that give people mental satisfaction that are not religion, that kind of evolved. And my next question is, what would you think would be the ideal education system in Israel?
Two simple questions. What do we have? 6 minutes, no problem. 3 minutes for each one. So let's take the first one. I don't think there's any doubt. So I like leading a Jewish life. It works for me. There are many things that are hard about it. It's not like going to the beach every Saturday, right? It's just not. But I still do it, right? So it's a strange choice that religious people make. Presumably they get something out of it, right? We could talk for an hour about what that might be. But one of the things you get from it, I don't think this is the reason people are religious, but one of the things you get from it is a feeling of belonging. All right, a feeling of connection. Maybe it's to the divine, maybe it's to your community, your Beit Knesset. You can find that in other ways. You don't have to go to synagogue to feel connected to the people. You can find it at a basketball game. And you do. You see it at a basketball game. What happens, my joke is when you're at a sporting event and the team that you care about scores the winning play as the clock goes to zero, that must have been something like when the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, came out of the Beit HaMikdash, out of the Kodesh Kodeshim, and he was alive. When that happened, the crowd goes crazy. They don't just go, oh, nice to see you again. Glad you didn't get killed in there, right? And think about what that must have felt like, if it is what happened, I don't know. But if that really is what happened, the emotional payoff for the people in the group is extraordinary, right? But that happens every Sunday in America at a football game. When of course, the other half, the Cohen didn't make it. Their team loses. They're in despair. They get drunk. They smash windows. They burn cars. It's a serious remark, actually. Sports is a zero-sum game. for one group to have the exhilaration and exaltation and the high of victory means another team is down and their fans are in despair, in sadness. So it's not the ideal way to satisfy the urge to belong. But even in that situation, the people on the losing team have a connection to the people around them, a sympathy. So sports is one way we do it. You can go work for an amutah. You can go build houses for people. We have students at Shalem who built houses after the recent war. That's a beautiful thing. I'm sure they felt very, they're not, I don't know if they're religious, not religious. It doesn't matter. They're going to get some of what a religious person gets. So I think there are, I think human beings have a desire to be more than themselves, okay? They have a desire to connect with others. They have a desire to achieve something great, often with other people, because it's hard to do it on your own. And I think there are many ways to do that. A startup does that, right? Startup gives you that feeling of satisfaction. There are many ways to avoid despair. But if you're not happy, because you don't have emunah, so you can't be in a religious service, and you don't have a family to smile and connect and love someone, and you can't have a good job, so what's left? Well, there's sports, and we see that. A lot of people turn to sports for a sense of connection, a sense of identity. Kipasruga, Ken? I'm in a club. I'm in a group. So on a sports team, you wear the same uniform, like the other people. I don't like this fact that Jews have different uniforms. I think it's kind of gross, but I get it. It's a human thing. It's what we long for. We want to belong. We want to, and we can't belong with too big a group, right? We like a small group. 50,000 in a football stadium seems like rather large, but that seems to work a little bit. So I don't have a simple answer for that, but I do think politics is another way that people find that satisfaction. They root for a party, they root for their leader, whether it's this person or that person, and they have a religious feeling about their politicians. I find that very sad. I would rather have a religious feeling about Kim Kardashian, but okay, that's what they do. Second question. 1 minute. It's good. I believe that it's very easy to misunderstand what markets are about. People think markets are about competition. They are, but that's not all they're about. So part of economics is about the fact, in my video we showed before, if I want to make a living as a baker, unfortunately or not, I have to get up early because the other bakers, I'm in competition with them and I have to match the quality of their bread, okay? There's another important part of economics, modern life, that's cooperation, not competition. You get together with a group of people and you build something. It could be for profit, like a business. It could be out of love, like an amutah. There's many, many ways to work with other people and make the world a better place. A lot of times people think that choice is between government and business. Good motives and selfish motives. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think there are different ways we work together. We work together through the political sphere as voters. I actually don't think it works very well. That's why I'm not a socialist. I don't think they spend the money, even if I don't deserve it, I don't think they spend it well. So I don't really get excited about if I would give away money, right? Happily, gladly. But my taxes, I often think, some of it's worthwhile, but much of it, I think, actually makes things worse. So I'm not a big fan of big government. But that's one way we work together. Second way we work together is we start a business. We do something for money. We sell a product. It has to be good enough that people are willing to pay for it relative to our competitors. That's an amazing thing. And the third way we make the world a better place and work together is in an amutah. And that's what's happening right here. This is a not-for-profit activity, right? We're not trying to make money. We're trying to do what we think is valuable, education. I was going to say something about, so all those compete with each other, right? The amutot compete for donations. The government competes for votes. The for-profit competes with other for-profit organizations. But underlying all of that is some level of cooperation, right? And I think what's missing from the education system in Israel and in the United States and in most places is that they have not figured out that you need both of those things. So in America, and I'm sure it's here too, there's no competition, almost none, at the younger ages. There is at college, right? So that's different. But there's no competition at the younger ages, and as a result, they don't try very hard. They don't get up in the morning. They don't grade the papers late at night. They don't have to. The students keep coming. I would like to unleash the cooperation that can happen when people work together to make a great school. There are many such schools in the United States, but they have a disadvantage. They have to collect donations or charge tuition, and the competitor, the government school, is free to the customer. It's all covered by taxes. I don't think it works very well. So I would like to see more opportunity for the cooperation that comes from the Amutah in the education field. Not a for-profit business doing schools. There's some that do that, but that's not what I want. I want the opportunity to I want to make it easier for people who care deeply about education to come together to create great schools for the poorest people who need the help. So we're out of time. Sorry I can't stay, folks. I would love to see you socially and talk over dinner, but I've got to get back to Yerushalayim, and I really enjoyed talking to you. And as I said, if you want to be in touch with me just for anything, just write me at my email. Thank you.